Welcome to Grounded, and we are so glad that you're here with us. And you're probably here for the same reason we are, for a little bit of clarity. There is a fire hose of news headlines coming at us hourly at this point. We've been talking about it in every episode, and we feel it with you. Instead of feeling confused and untethered, though, the goal here is instead to try to stay grounded. I'm Maritza Giorgio, a longtime political journalist, alongside my co-host, former U.S. Senator John Tester of Montana.
Good to be with you, Marisa, and it's good to have all the listeners on board. Once again, this week is not unlike the last few weeks we've been doing this, and that a lot of shit rolling down the hill. We just got to figure out which turd we're going to pick up, quite frankly. And there's a lot of stuff, and I wish I could say it was all good, but from my perspective, some of it's pretty damn scary. And with that, we'll get after it, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit of a peek behind the curtain here. John and I usually chat throughout the week, send text messages about the headlines that are standing out to us, what we are hearing about, what we want to talk about, and then we go from there. And the topic of this particular show has changed so many times over the last 5 days. Like at one point we discussed talking about the USPS. We will get to that show eventually. We talked about maybe trying to talk to someone from Maine, the state of Maine, after an encounter at the White House between President Trump and the governor there when he basically threatened her future in politics. And then she said, well, I'll see you in court. Friday night, it all changed. We saw the Trump administration fire several top military leaders on Friday night. And that includes the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. By the way, the headlines to talk about did not stop on Friday night. On Saturday, we saw Elon Musk mandating all federal employees respond to an email with the tasks they completed the prior week or they lose their job.
Might I add, not to point out the obvious, but Elon Musk is not an elected official of the United States government, and he is telling folks either do this or you're going to be gone. It'll be pretty disconcerting, but carry on.
On his social media platform, which is not an official form of communication for the government. We'll point that out too. The government has since walked that back a little bit. We're seeing department heads saying, don't worry about that. You don't need to respond, but we'll get to that. Then on Sunday night, we heard that podcast host Dan Bongino will now be the deputy director of the FBI. Doesn't stop there. Monday afternoon, the United States aligned with Russia to vote against a UN resolution that condemns the war in Ukraine. And that's glossing over a lot of other topics we had thought about talking about.
Yeah, a few days back, seems like it was weeks ago now, we talked to Jean Shaheen because she was at the G7 and then went into Ukraine. And if you haven't heard that episode, I'd recommend you bring it up. It was pretty compelling, at least from my perspective, about what has transpired at the G7 and more importantly, what transpired in Ukraine and their visit there. But the truth is that this stuff continues to go on and on. And I think if the UN resolution vote would have happened last Friday, we may well be talking about that today. Because quite honestly, it was just the United States and Russia who voted against the resolution to condemn Russia and their unprovoked war against Ukraine. I've said for a long time, and I've thought this too, this country stands for certain things. And one of the things it does stand for, I believe, and I hope it still does, is democracy. And we have been the leader of the free world since World War II. And the fact that we've seen the United States, we've seen the president turn his back on NATO and now join with Russia to quite frankly, form an alliance that I don't think represents the United States of America's values whatsoever is a little disconcerting to me. So not just a little bit, it's a lot disconcerting to me. So, there's a lot of stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff floating down the hill, and we just got to figure out which one we're going to deal with this week because there's too much to really cover unless we want to have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week podcast. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, he's got too much work to do on the farm for that. But yeah, I am interested to see what the response is to this vote. And as far as the other stuff, I've been working as a professional journalist for 19 years. And one of my main goals throughout my career has been really, truly to break things down in simple ways that is easy to understand for everybody. And I am so guilty of this as well. If something seems confusing or complicated, goes over your head a little bit, it's easy to just kind of ignore it. We talk about massive layoffs within the federal government, which, on the surface, they're really easy to understand. It's really scary to go through something like that to lose your job. But what we want to do here today on this podcast is explain in simple terms what these military moves mean for all of us. This is high level stuff. We want to spell it out with clarity and then also talk a little bit more about the emails over the weekend and this vote, this UN vote.
Yeah, we got stuff to talk about, and so I think we ought to get after it and visit about some of the stuff that's come down.
Okay, so let's just get down to the nuts and bolts here. We haven't gone super in depth into the actual chronological events of some of the headlines we cover, but this one's important. So, Friday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on a Friday night, President Trump announced on his social media platform that he was firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, replacing him with Air Force Lieutenant General John Dan Kane, also known as Raising Kane. And that wasn't the only person here purged, though, from the Pentagon. 6 officials were fired, including the first woman to lead the Navy, the vice chief of the Air Force, and this is the other part, very worth mentioning and paying attention to. He also fired the top lawyers, known as JAGs, for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. And there are reported plans to cut 5,400 civilian jobs starting this week, which equates to about 5 to 8% of the workforce. Did I miss anything, Senator?
No, I think you hit it pretty well. I can tell you that I served as chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee. I can tell you that I got briefed many times on what's going on around the world. And if we always stay up at night, get one of those confidential briefings because they talked about what Russia was doing or what China's doing, on land and the sea and in space. And it's nothing to fool around with. And my concern here is twofold. Number one, well, actually, it's more than twofold. And number one, though, is that we have a person that has a stellar um, military record, and CQ Brown is somebody that I've known for the last probably 10 years, an incredible man that has incredible skill set, that understands the challenges that are out there, being replaced and thereby appears to be politicizing the military, which has never been done, which is also very dangerous. But being replaced by somebody who the reason CQ Brown's got that job is because he understands what the threats are, and probably be replaced by somebody who doesn't fully understand what the threats are.
And Trump actually appointed him to be chief of the Air Force during the first Trump administration. He was only the second Black general to serve as chairman after Colin Powell. And last fall, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth went on a show and said that General Brown needs to be fired because of his focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the military. And then on his first day in the Pentagon, Hegseth was actually asked about firing Brown and said, well, I'm standing with him right now. I look forward to working with him. A few short weeks later, here we are. He's gone, along with several others at the top.
And it's great to have Jack Reed on. Jack is a military guy himself and served in the United States Senate. I'm going to tell you how many years, but it's been a long time. Has been chairman and ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, one of the key committees in the United States Senate. He serves as ranking member now. He is somebody that I had the honor and privilege to work alongside during particularly my last 4 years in the U.S. Senate, because as Jack was chairman of the Armed Services Committee, I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee on Defense, and we were able to work very well together. Jack is somebody that brings a level of common sense to the equation, like quite frankly, darn few people do in the United States Senate. It's good to have you here, Jack. I just want to step back just for a second and
Yeah.
think about when Senator Tuberville held held up the nominations of the highest ranking people in the armed services because he had his own agenda and the impacts that that had. And I remember people coming to you as I was standing there saying, you know, we've got to get the generals out there talking about how this is inappropriate. And I remember every time, Jack, you said you can't be doing that. That's we would be politicizing the military, and that is absolutely the wrong thing to be doing. And I very much appreciate that perspective. Can you kind of talk about where we are now when it comes to politicizing the military? Because it just seems like Brown got fired because for political reasons. Is that a fair statement to make, or am I off base there?
No, I think it's a very fair statement, John. And before I proceed, let me thank you for your service and friendship. It's been terrific. And Maritza, good luck on this endeavor with my buddy John Tester. The one major fear I have is the politicalization of the military by Trump and Hegseth. You can see it in the firing. Uh, General Brown was a capable officer, combat fighter pilot. He served with great distinction, as Maritza pointed out. He was nominated to be Chief of Staff of the Air Force by Trump. So he obviously got through the vetting there, and he performed well enough to be uh, set up to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But it's not just Joe Brown. It's Admiral Franchetti, a female, the first female chief of staff of the Navy, and it's others who they consider to be politically suspect. It's all, in my view, all about politics. And what really confirms this to me, and is not getting enough attention, is then Hegseth went across the board and fired all the judge advocate general in every service. And to me, when you're not going to follow the law, the first thing you want to do is get rid of the lawyer who's going to tell you you're doing something wrong. And that is a real shot at the independence and the professionalism of the military. So when you add all this together, uh, they are trying to politicize the military in a way that, as you pointed out, is inconsistent with what I was taught, but also what our professional officers and senior NCOs and all of our people think is the right way to do it, which is it's not politics, it's national service.
Could you expand a little bit? Because part of really what we want to do here is spell things out for people. So when you say they're going to get rid of the lawyers because they don't want to follow the law, what does that look like for us? What does that look like for American citizens? What could we see happen by
Well,
doing?
I think what you can see happening is, right now, the use of military forces is circumscribed dramatically by the doctrine of posse comitatus. It says they can't be used in law enforcement. And I think they're going to make a conscious effort to weaken that restraint along the southern border in particular. They're really sending a lot of troops down there. And frankly, the border has been stabilizing before President Trump was elected and continuing. But they're saying, "Oh, we can't, support countries around the globe. We have to put more forces on the border." That's one aspect of it. Um, and but another aspect, we had a very uh, insightful hearing, in my view, or Secretary Hegstead. And one of the issues I brought up is that Hegstead lobbied ferociously for President Trump to pardon a army officer who had ordered his men to shoot civilians. He was turned in by his own troops. They were appalled at what he did. He was convicted with due process by his peers. And Hegseth said, you know, no, pardon. And Trump did. So here's a guy that equates, you know, you know, lethality and warrior ethos with people like that. I'm afraid. And so you don't want lawyers coming up and say, I'm sorry, you can't do that because, that is against the Geneva Convention. And that is, I think, unfortunately, a direction we might be heading. And we have to speak out, stand up.
Just in the last 10 days or so, we've seen the United States absolutely unequivocally walk away from NATO. Um, we've seen uh, the president fire our head military person in CQ Brown. You know what China's up to. You know what North Korea, Iran, and we know what Russia's up to. Does this does this make us more secure or less secure? And if it makes us more secure, why? Or if it makes us less secure, why?
Well, what it does is undercut the whole structure of international relations dating from World War II, in which America, with strong alliances like NATO and individual bilateral alliances, was able to be a force for peace and progress, with some exceptions, but generally so. Uh, Now we have a situation where this is a tectonic shift. We're going to a situation where we are actually taking the side of an autocrat who ordered the invasion of a sovereign nation. Uh, that's not someplace I thought you and I thought would be in the future at all. And then we're looking at the disintegration of our alliance. Uh, the Europeans are very much concerned. And I think that'll translate also into Asia because our Japanese, South Korean, the Philippines, they're going to wonder, are we going to stick by them if the going gets rough or it gets just uncomfortable? And the Taiwanese, I think, are probably recalculating dramatically. This will lead, I think, and it's happening now, and particularly in the dimension of nuclear armaments, to not a bipolar world, which was the Cold War, and then for at least a decade or more, a unipolar role, the United States. It'll be tripolar. China, with its expansionist ideas, and then Russia, which is a lagging economy and, probably has reached its crescent in terms of, its economic viability and other things, but still presents a formidable foe. And I'm convinced that they will not give up their desire to uh, take back the Baltic, insinuate themselves to Poland, etc. So this is a traumatic moment and a dramatic moment for world history and the United States. Now, having said that, any set of decisions generates good consequences and bad consequences. Our task right now is to ensure we do all we can to make the good consequences outweigh considerably the bad consequences. There'll be a little of both, I'm sure. That's the way the world works. But we
So,
have to.
Senator, how do you do that? How do you do that? What can be done? What can your committee do? What can other senators
Well,
do? What can civilians do?
no, yeah, no, it's difficult, but I mean, first of this is to, I think, uh, and it's ironic because on the Senate side, and John witnessed this, there was uniform bipartisan support for Ukraine, and we passed a bill with 70 plus votes, and Trump essentially ordered the Speaker of the House to hold it for 6 months to diminish the Ukrainian effort, to diminish President Biden's diplomacy and support. And they cooperated. Now, what we've seen, though, is that Trump has really, I think, even captured uh, the attention, if you will, and the allegiance of many of my colleagues in the Senate and Republican side. But so the first step is really on a bipartisan basis, you know, returning to that spirit of support and cooperation with Ukraine. It's going to be difficult. And one thing that makes it difficult is that this issue, the average voter in Montana or Rhode Island, they want the Ukrainians to succeed, but, that's several levels down from their to do list. Uh, and that's one of the problems with foreign policy in general. So and this is, I must add, just a quick note that, when you look at this and you couple it with essentially the destruction of the USAID agency, the Agency for International Development, we're diminishing our hard power in Europe, particularly, and we're diminishing our soft power all over the world. Our alliances are failing. We won't have a presence in Africa, really. We don't have any military troops to speak of, except for Djibouti. But what we do is in close cooperation with many not-for-profits, where they're helping with respect to HIV, maternal health. We're doing lots of positive things. That gives us a little credit. and we're going to stop to do that. And then, by the way, John, you probably hear your farmers, those USAID contracts are now invalid, supposedly. So,
Right. Yeah, it's going to have impacts. There's no doubt about that from an agricultural perspective. And we're not going to talk about tariffs today, but I'll tell you, between USAID and the tariffs, it could have some really draconian consequences for folks that are in production ag. There's just no doubt about that. I've got one more I want to ask you, Jack, and we really appreciate your time. And that is, if you combine what happened last week in the G7, the president's statements about Ukraine, the firing of not only the JAGs, the attorneys in the military, but also CQ Brown, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What does this do for our recruitment, for our readiness in the military, in all the branches?
well, I think what it's doing is causing severe morale problems within the ranks. It's just this uncertainty and what do I have to do? I understood previously what my job was. I was a professional. I didn't do politics. I gave the best military advice I could, et cetera. Now there's concern. And that I think will translate into difficulties with retention. I've already heard sort of anecdotes about, and I should say, before these generals retired, Admiral Fagan, the commandant of the Coast Guard, was fired. And I've heard of Coast Guard female officers who say, well, there's no future for me, I'm leaving. So we are cutting off, I think it's roughly, don't quote me, about 18% of our force is female. Over 30% are minorities, African Americans and Latinas. And I think for them, they're going to start wondering, hey, these people are fired. What were they fired for? No one's giving a good reason. And, I think that's going to cut back on recruiting. And I think also, too, and let me give you an example of this, is that what I've heard and what I know is that as President Bush signed the proclamation of Black History Month, Secretary Hestad said there is no Black History Month in the United States military, which is, I think, kind of a slap in the face to a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardians, Marines, etc. The other aspect of this is the way the military react. It's like, oh my God, they're so efficient at doing something, even if it's not the right thing to do. One example was there was an annual parade in Maryland for Frederick Douglass, the great African American writer, speaker, et cetera. And they refused to allow the Maryland National Guard band to go into the parade because the order from DOD was no celebration of Black History Month. I mean, come on, give me a break. They, I think the word is, or the suggestion is that they're going to cut back recruiting from African American specific organizations because they can't do anything that elevates, or excuse me, when you have, the American Society of College Black Engineers, then what better place to look for competent, talented officers? At West Point, for example, they eliminated the Women's Black Engineering Club. So it's just becoming kind of, with all this going on, it's just the uncertainty, the confusion, and the questioning, I think, is going to have an adverse effect on recruitment and retention.
From where you're sitting, we did see Secretary Pete Hegseth send a memo calling for Pentagon officials to look for cuts of 8% a year
Wow.
in defense spending. So on top of all these things we've talked about, what will that do? And what do you see being cut? What will be in that 8% from your crystal ball?
The Secretary has ordered an 8% cut for the next 5 years and suggested we could do this by getting rid of the DEI program and the climate programs. And those two programs combined constitute 0.1% of the DoD budget. It will in no way make up an $8 billion cut. So he's going to have to be serious, look for weapon systems, personnel issues, quality of life issues, et cetera, if he's going to choose that cut. And it's also going to be, he's also ordered about 5,000 probationary employees in public defense be eliminated. And they've done that all the other agencies. And it's ridiculous. I had a young lady came up to me in the airport in Providence and said, Senator, I just want to tell you, last week I was let go by the National Atomic and NSSA, National Nuclear Security Administration.
Yep.
And I was called back today because they discovered they didn't have the critical people basically to keep our stockpile safe and well protected. So that's the kind of nonsense that's going back and forth and back and forth. And then, you've got Musk and those folks. Although I think the Pentagon is just trying to distance themselves. But still, it's these layoffs of civilians, the message to the military that unless you are subservient to the president and secretary, then find a new job is going to be very painful for the military. And ultimately it goes against the Constitution of the United States. I mean, everyone who joins the military takes an oath to the Constitution, not to the president. And that oath requires, and the one officers, the many I admire greatly, stood up to not just President Trump, but to other presidents. Say can't be done. That's not what the Constitution would allow. And I'm afraid we're going to get people who are just too frightened and intimidated to stand up, and that would be terrible because that's an invitation for making colossal mistakes.
In that vein, 8% cut. Probably the biggest hawk that I served over there was Lindsey Graham. What's Lindsey say about an 8% cut?
Well, he hasn't said much, but when Lindsey was doing his budget, he had this special budget to take care of the border and the military. They put $150 billion in for DOD. Now, I don't know because we have to go through careful analysis, but they might think that's a slush fund. So they on one side can say, "Hey, we cut 8%, but we're pulling money out of our funds to take care of things we need." But the reality too, and John, you know this, we're at a critical stage. One, we have to invigorate our nuclear deterrence. That means we have to build strategic submarines like the Columbia. We have to have our aircraft replaced to B-21, and we have to, up your way, replace all our missile fields. And that project is going to be the most expensive military construction project in history. But
Yep.
we've got to do that because without deterrence, you're inviting someone to think he might be lucky and strike first. Then, we're looking at these new technologies. Drones are just in Ukraine are wreaking havoc on both sides. The Ukrainians are very clever. The Russians are trying to learn. The Iranians built a plant in Russia to build drones, the Russians. So this is a big deal. We have to adapt to that. Cybersecurity, AI, or, artificial intelligence, that has to be incorporated. We're looking at, for example, and you are aware of this because you're one of the great supporters of this aircraft, that one-man aircraft and multiple autonomous aircraft. So the pilot can direct them out to the target. And if they're down, well, that's just money. It's not an American aviator. So this is all, coming at a time where we really just have to rebalance ourselves. And then, a point related to our previous discussion. Part of the burden of our operations since World War II was taken up by our allies. The only time that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty was invoked was when we were attacked on 9/11. So when you went to Afghanistan, there was British troops there. In fact, I think Prince Harry served there. You had cooperation, collaboration, etc., and that helped us in many cases. And now I think it's going to be very difficult for the European countries to say, "Listen, we're going to go and help you if you have a problem, because we've got to take care of our own business." So again, both the diplomatic initiatives have been frustrated, and the military initiatives.
I think what I'm seeing in at least the young vote is people really not fully understanding history. And we talk a lot about World War II when we talk about NATO, when we talk about Ukraine, when we talk
Mhm.
about Russia. So let's spell this out. From where you're sitting, what would the world look like today if the US made a decision like they made today and didn't come to the defense of its allies in Europe and
After
didn't
World War
enter?
II? Well,
Yes.
I think the Stalin and the Soviets would have rolled over more territory, uh, and then they would have intimidated the countries that were still, uh, so-called free, so that they'd be cooperative allies and partners of the Soviets. I think they would feel very much engaged in, the fact that they were the dominant power in Europe and maybe more effective around the globe. Uh, I think that would be the biggest effect. Uh, also, though, here's the problem. You know, the Soviet Union and the United States had nuclear weapons. And again, there could have been a situation where the Russians, Soviets felt, hey, we can take these guys today. Um, and that didn't happen. And there's many dynamics afoot. But, one reason was that, in fact, I remember when I was younger, there was a big, big debate about tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. And we came to grips with the Soviets and they sorted it out, but it was very testy for a while. And, frankly, the Cuban Missile Crisis. If we didn't have, the count on the Allies and the Soviets weren't worried about what might the reaction be, that could have ended different. I don't know. I'm just purely speculating. So
It's
it seemed to work for about, uh, what, 65 years or so. It seemed to work. Now it's uncertain what.
yeah. Well, I think we can all agree that it's good to have friends and there's strength in those friendships. And one of our great abilities since World War II is to have friends in Europe, have friends in the Pacific Rim, have friends in South America, have
Yeah,
friends in Australia, and without those friends, I think it doesn't weaken us; it cripples us.
no, you're absolutely right, John.
Yeah.
One point I'll just add a further point too is that a lot of the things they're doing is just going to make the world more complicated. For example, as they deny climate change, as they try to cut back the programs that President Biden passed, what we're going to see is an accelerating destructive climate effects, and that causes people to have to move. And that's going to, start shifting people immigration, which is a very sensitive issue. And so, it's going to make our job nationally very more difficult. So they're complicating the situation, which is never simple in the first place. Um, and again, our job will be to, uh, as this evolves, and hopefully it might be, uh, if not revoked, then significantly modified. Our job is to find the good things and emphasize those and bring those out and minimize the bad.
Well, Jack, I just want to thank you for being on the show today, and I
Sure.
also want to thank you for your service to our nation. I did not know that you were a paratrooper. I read
Oh,
that.
yeah. Yeah.
Man, that's good. That's
I
good.
was a senior paratrooper. I was a jump master. I made 37 jumps. Uh, most of them were cold. We joked around. Most of them were night drops, and even in the daylight, because when your eyes are closed, it's just like night.
That's perfect.
But yeah, it takes a while. I mean, I'm a guy that's, it takes a while. The first few jumps are clearly, it's, I won't say terrifying, but it's disturbing. And all you look for is the door of the aircraft and the light coming in and the wind coming in. And then you just, say the Hail Mary and jump out. After a while, though, I became a jump master. My job was to get everybody out of the aircraft safely. So I couldn't be emotional about it. I had to be very go, go, go. And I was able to do it, but I had a lot of help. The one thing about the service is if you've got good non-commissioned officers, they will prevent a lot of lieutenants and captains from making very dumb mistakes. And I'm looking proof of that. And I'm worried, that all this turmoil is going to, a lot of potentially very decent non-commissioned officers are going to say, "Biff, I can make my money outside."
Thank you,
Sir.
for being here today.
Okay, I know.
All right. Thanks, Jack.
What a great conversation.
He's a great guy. You know, I don't, I don't want to recount everything he said, but there's a couple things that he said that if it doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. Number one was Hegthas pleading for the guy to be pardoned that shot at U.S. citizens. That combined with getting rid of the JAGs, that kind of crap really worries me. I got to tell you, I mean, that kind of stuff really, really worries me. I remember the Kent State shooting. I think it was junior high. And man, oh man, that was just something that people would not tolerate and shouldn't tolerate, quite frankly. That's number one. Number two, deterrence. You know, I live pretty close to Monster Air Force Base, which is one of the 150 missiles does the ICBMs. And their whole goal isn't to blow people up, it's to stop people from blowing us up. It's deterrence. And I don't care if you're talking ICBMs, if you're talking subs, if you're talking airplanes. Those have been a pretty damn effective deterrent since World War II, and we need to keep that in mind moving forward. That if those are going to be deterrents, they have to be 21st century. And so when we talk about what kind of money needs to be invested into those weapon systems, it's serious dough, and it's an incredible amount of money to rebuild the silos, to put in new missiles, to put in new warheads, and it's submarines the same way, replacing B-21 the same way. It just costs a lot of money. Now, if you're not going to do that, you can probably save 8% in your budget. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to get our military really ready and up to snuff, you're going to have to spend some dollars to do that. And I think that's really important. I think national security is really important. And we ought to be paying attention to people like Jack Reed, what he's talking about, what needs to be done to make sure that this country is secure.
And it goes back to this common thread that we keep talking about, which is, do people really even understand what goes into our nuclear weapons deterrent system? And I remember how many people were shocked when they saw how many missile silos are in Montana, and to even understand what goes on in that realm of our government. And I think I certainly don't fully understand it, and I would guess that a lot of people don't, especially when this task force is looking for places to cut. Do they fully understand?
I very much doubt it, and I don't think we have to understand it. I think we have to understand the goal here, and the goal is deterrence, so we don't get attacked. I think we need to understand also that it is a very complicated system, right? So I mean, it takes in all the branches of our military, it takes in the Space Force, all those things are involved, and they all have to work together. They all have to talk together. And I think that's the point about politicizing the military. You don't want to have a situation where I'm not going to talk that guy like Congress is. I'm not going to talk that guy because he's a Republican, or I'm not going to talk that guy because he's a Democrat, or whatever it might be. You've got to have people that are communicating to one another, that trust one another, and leave the damn politics out of it, because all that does, in my opinion, is it divides people and makes them less communicative. And it's just really important that we have a military that is the best it can be. And if there are improvements that need to be made, and there's always improvements that need to be made, let's make those improvements. But politicizing the military, as Jack Reed pointed out to me years ago, is not an improvement for our military. It makes it far, far, far less effective, and that deterrence goes away. And when the deterrence goes away, then you're opening yourself up for bad things to happen to your country.
On top of sending a message that there's a lot of chaos and unsteadiness happening within departments.
And I guarantee you that our foes in the world, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, are monitoring everything we're doing right now, and they understand what the consequences and the benefits to them.
Let me ask you a little bit more about that, because at the beginning you talked about reading some of those classified briefings and they'll keep you up at night. You're not the only lawmaker who reads those briefings, and it's certainly not just for one political party. I assume there are multiple senators right now who are reading the same things that you read that kept you up at night. So what's stopping them from saying, hey, we should condemn Russia? Or saying, hey, this is really troubling and we need to make sure we protect the American people?
Um, Let me first of all go back to your first question, and that is not everybody in the Senate gets the classified briefings. You have to be on Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, Intel, or on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. And then we get briefed in person in little coolers called skiffs by generals throughout the country, or people from the CIA, more particular intelligence groups. But the truth is, and the rest of it is reading. And oftentimes, senators get so damn busy that they're not made aware that some of those documents are really, really important, so they don't go down and read them. I'm not saying that happens a lot, but it happens quite a bit. And so there's that. But I will tell you that it doesn't take much of a briefing to understand the threats that are out there and how real those threats are. And the fact that as policymakers in Congress, and I say Congress, meaning Congress, they have to step up and they have to make sure things are being done right. They cannot just let the executive branch do whatever the hell they want. That's not what the forefathers had in mind. And that's not what our Constitution says. And by the way, if Congress keeps pushing off their authority and giving it to the executive branch at some point in time, somebody's going to say, why do we even need to pay these guys? I mean, under the best of times, it's pretty damn dysfunctional. And so, it's a situation where you're right, Marisa. They all should know. Most of them, I believe, do know. And I think the reason they're not pushing back, this is my opinion, I don't want to beat this horse more again, but I think it has to do with campaign finance reform. And I think it has to do with, three of the richest guys on earth that are pretty much controlling the government right now that can say, hey, we're going to drop some pocket change to them, but hundreds of millions of dollars and beat you in a primary. And I think that's that needs to be fixed too.
One thing that we keep hearing about from people just writing us, what can we do? What are people doing? What can be done? And when it comes to action, there hasn't been a lot of it. However, we saw that change a little bit this week. We saw something play out in town halls across the United States, constituents demanding answers from their lawmakers. So my question to you is, will this move the needle? And what if your lawmakers aren't holding town halls?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's part of what makes America strong, differences of opinion. And if you're a policymaker and I think it's incumbent upon you to hold town hall meetings and put yourself out there so you can gather input from the people you represent. And of course, I'm always said for the people that are out there as regular constituents, you've got to be respectful. You've got to come in and be thoughtful on your questions and ask good questions and demand an answer. And I think sometimes it's really, really painful for the elected official, but it's part of how our government works. And for those folks who don't do town hall meetings, who don't open their offices, allow people in to visit about the challenges that are out there, hopefully they're held accountable for that in the election. I just don't think that's good politics, quite frankly. And I think it makes for lousy policy too. As I've said before, Democrats don't have it right all the time and they're not wrong all the time. The same thing with Republicans. So if you can go out and get a cross section of ideas of what's going on out there on the ground, I think it helps you be a more effective legislator. And Congress people need to have that. And I know there's a lot of folks, some of them from this state that we live in, that don't like to have town hall meetings because, quite frankly, they hold you accountable. And that's okay. I mean, that's how the system should work. Holding your elected officials accountable is really important. And it shouldn't just happen on election day. It should happen every day.
Okay, we've covered so much heavy stuff. Before I let you go back to your work on the farm, I've noticed you wear a different hat every time we get on one of these calls. And today, for our listeners who are not watching the video, he's wearing a hat that says 3,562. So I'm going to start asking you what these hats mean. And I would love for you to tell us what 3,562 means.
It's a subliminal message, and I'd love to tell you it's a prime number, but anybody that knows prime numbers knows that even numbers can be prime numbers. At any rate, a couple things. This is the amount that I won in 2006 by Lieutenant Governor Cooney gave me this hat, and I've had it ever since. I don't wear it often, but I'd wear it every once in a while to remind people that every vote counts and that your opinion counts. And so if you have things you have to get off your chest, get on the email and send it off. And because 3,562 people, and you can actually cut that in half and add one, is really the number of people that I won that election by. If I had, 1,761 less people vote for me and swip over to vote for the other guy, I'd have never won to begin with. So your vote counts, and everybody's vote counts. A couple things. Folks know I live in north central Montana. Spring has sprung, and we've turned from snow to water, and we got water running everywhere, which is pretty cool. And the last thing I'll tell you, and this comes from some of the comments that Jack talked about. I was 6 years old when the Cuban Missile Crisis went on. And I remember the teacher talking to us about bomb shelters and crawling under your desk if we were attacked and all that stuff. I think it's important you tell your kids that, we've been around for 249 years. Democracy's going through tough times. But the truth is, if good people stand up and speak up, we'll be around for another 249 years. But you can't just sit on your hands. You gotta get out there. You got to talk to folks. You got to do it respectfully, but they've got to make sure your opinions are being heard. So that's about it. But yep, 3562, baby. Doggone Cooney has to send this to me and make me think of it all the time,
I like it. Well, and I think those are great comments about the kids. My own son asks me all the time, "Are we safe?" And I think it's important to have these conversations with our kids because they can see what's happening. They understand a lot more than we think they do. That will do it for us today here on Grounded with John Tester and Maritza Giorgio. As always, you can find us on Blue Sky and Instagram. You can also send us an email at groundedpcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much to Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island. And of course, our friends at Pearl Jam for letting us use their music. And thank you, our listeners, for staying grounded with us. We will talk soon.